discussions, presentations, workshops, whirly things, all sorts of stuff going on. We come to our capstone presentation, and all of you at this stage have seen some of Bryan's work because it has been featuring on the CESI website. Katie introduced us to visual thinkery, and we all looked at her and said, "Pardon?" in the politest form of the word. So I am not going to in any way attempt to preempt what Bryan might say. I'm simply going to introduce him to you. Bryan.
Yeah, thank you for staying around. We're a skeleton crew, but I know that's because the tickets to this were very expensive, this last bit. So I just really appreciate you shelling out for the finale, I suppose. Yeah, look, I'm really pleased to come and speak to you. They never seem to make things high enough here, in terms of. But hopefully you can hear me okay. Can you hear me okay at the back? Yeah, is it good? Lovely. Okay. But yeah, it's a real privilege to come and speak with you. It's actually been great to hang around last night at the Teach Meet and to just sort of eavesdrop into some of the conversations. And obviously it's just lovely to come back home to Ireland anyway, because I'm based in London, and to compare histories, I suppose. Because as I get older, I realise that the history that I inherited growing up in the north is a very strange and narrow Irish history. And therefore, by having conversations with fellow Irish people, I get to broaden that history and learn some things. And so, I'm really appreciative of that. Anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about a big bag of craziness, which is visual thinkery, because you'll have noticed the. I'm going to do this off an iPad. I haven't presented off an iPad before, but we'll see how it goes. You'll have seen some of the imagery around, hopefully. And I'd like to say that I created that imagery, and in some ways I did, but it was very collaborative. I have a collaborative process. Essentially, everything I create comes from conversation, comes from dialogue, okay? And usually, whenever I get a bunch of people together, and I got a few of the CESI exec together to create this artwork, but whenever I get people together, I'm generally asking three questions. I'm asking, what are you trying to say? Who are you trying to say it to? And why are you saying it? Right? So that generally underpins all of the stuff that I create. Okay? And even today, I've been sort of listening into. This is from the keynote this morning. And just a little thing just stuck in my head, just the mention of soft power and what Cornelia meant by that. You know what I mean, or what I take that meaning to be. Before too long, I'm scribbling at my sketchbook and I'm creating something. I thought I would just sort of dip in and try to put together some of the things I've come across just for last night and today. So from sort of turtle stitching, which I had no idea such a thing existed, to blockchain by dance, you know what I mean, which was an experience by itself, But also, I think in some of the conversations that I've had with individuals, this gender problem that we sometimes recognise, you know who I'm looking at there in some of the offline conversations, and guerrilla CPD somebody mentioned yesterday, and I thought, that's an interesting term. I need to think more about that. Or quite often I'll try to sit and think of what are all the things, can I put them together, what meaning can I take from it? But the story that I'm going to tell you is one of latent potential, because I haven't been drawing for that long. My background's software engineering, and this visual thinkery is definitely a story of latent potential. It's like somehow I've found a part of myself that I didn't know was there. essentially, I had grown a software company and sold it to an organisation called City and Guilds. I found myself inside City and Guilds, which is a very political organisation inside. And I was used to sort of a startup, it was greater than the sum of its parts. And all of a sudden, there's a different game being played, and I have no idea how to play that game. And somebody introduced me to drawing on an iPad. Drawing on an iPad's really forgiving because you can undo if it doesn't work out. You know what I mean? So if you draw something, oh, that's not quite right, undo, and until you sort of get it right. And so I remember I was fighting with the IT department at that time. You know what I mean? Because I was trying to sort of say, look, IT in an organisation is very different from building products for customers, which is outside the organisation. So if you don't stand in the shoes of your customers, you're really going to be throwing technology at them rather than trying to make their lives simpler, right? So I was trying to have this conversation and not making a very good job of it. And anyway, I decided to sort of take a more visual approach, and it just went down really well, right? In fact, since then, nobody's told me to stop, and that's sort of how I've got here, right? But before too long, I also realized that if you send someone a visual of an idea, it sort of stays the way it is. It sort of hangs around. So I could send the board of City and Guilds a visual idea, and it still had my fingerprints on it, and it appeared on their presentations, rather than if you did that using sentences. And I thought, that's really interesting. And then people started asking me to translate their stuff into images, so I started to do that as well, and then I started to go to conferences like the Alt Conference, and again, just from a curious point of view, try to pick up. And Catherine Cronin was one of my early victims, trying to just dial into something that she's saying, and turn it into an image and share it on Twitter. And when everyone else is sharing sentences on Twitter and you're sharing images, you win. That's how it goes. And then I realized, hold on a minute. What about sort of connecting with other people? I don't know if you're aware of Sir Ken Robinson. Anyway, I came across a little video he had done with another person, and just something that he said really struck me. He was talking about creativity in schools, and I created something and I tweeted it at him, and sure enough, he retweeted it, right? And I at that point had 300 followers. He has 120,000 followers, and all of a sudden, there's people going, "Oh, I really like that." And Twitter became a really important part in that validation journey. It also became a big trap, because if you get to the point where you're only creating stuff in your head, it's only good if people retweet it. That's a hole. You know what I mean? You don't want to be there. So, but that's the journey to becoming an artist, where the idea, and it took me years before I called myself an artist, but the idea of being an artist is saying, I create what I will create. And I hope people find meaning in it. But if they don't, that's okay, right? And that was a big step forward for me. Anyway, I'm already rambling, as you can see. This could go on for hours, and if it does, just throw things at me, right? But it's also, this story I'm telling you is also a journey of my Achilles heel becoming my superpower. And I'll explain what I mean by that later on. By the way, this is I usually draw using Procreate on the iPad. And recently in Procreate 5, they've just added a little bit of animation to that. So you can do little animations like this really easy. In fact, if I can just switch to it, I'll show you it. Let's see, here's Procreate. Let's go back in here. So this is my animation, and essentially it allows you to do what's called onion skinning, all right? Which is essentially, I've got two frames here, but it allows you to see the little greyness of the Achilles heel and the superpower. It allows you to see what the previous frame is and what the next frame is, and so if I flick to one frame, you see it just changes it, and so if I press play there, and you see that's just sort of flicking between two, and as we were the last session I was in was the GeoGebra. Making something move bringing something to life, almost just gives it a different feel, doesn't it? It allows you to take different meaning from it. Right, anyway, back to this presentation. That's enough distraction there. Right, good. Lovely. But this journey has taken me in some really interesting places because one of my early clients, which was Reclaim Hosting, really taught me a lot about aesthetic. And the fact that aesthetic, you can absorb aesthetic. In fact, you absorb aesthetic before your conscious brain, processes something. It's an amazing power if you can use aesthetic and give a feeling to something. Ideas, what makes a good idea? I still fascinate about that question because I found that your first idea is often the most obvious idea and as often isn't the strongest idea. And you've got to really dig under the surface to get to get something that is really strong. So playing around with sort of ideas and sort of a design thinking approach has really helped. Identity and branding, is something I've played a lot with, in terms of I've seen my artwork. People have created a lot of stickers and T-shirts and all sorts, really. But when someone says I am this, you know what I mean? I identify with this. What are they saying? What do they really mean by that? How can you create stuff that people will do that too? The use of metaphor. Obviously, creating things that people will recognize already because of the metaphors that you use. Creating a visual language that then can be used to, create 1,000 more things. And then also sort of just really starting to get underneath comics and cartoons and how some of these things have existed for so long and I really haven't paid them any attention. And there's so much to learn from this stuff. So as you can tell, I'm a fairly curious chap. But the more you look at this stuff, the more there is to see, which is sort of generally the case. In fact, this is generally my process. You notice something and it makes you, oh, wonder what, and that just makes you notice more things, and there's this sort of this cycle that continues. But over the time, I've created a process of working with the clients that I work with. And I went through this process with the CESI exec, right? And I'll explain a little bit about what this process or how it works. Because it all starts in conversation. It all starts in asking the right questions, creating the space for those questions to be answered or for people to think out loud or for people to be open about the stuff that's in their head. And that's easier said than done because quite often when you get people together, there are some loud voices and some quiet voices. There are people who are quite happily interrupting anybody else. There are people who are empowered and people who are disempowered, and therefore being able to facilitate a conversation and really, really unearth what people are. The amount of times I will switch to someone who hasn't said much, and they'll start with the line, "This probably doesn't make any sense, but," and I know that there's a good idea there, because it's usually that person hasn't been given that opportunity or hasn't the confidence, but that there is something golden in there, So actually being able to ask the right questions, create that space and get people to talk openly. And often I record that. So I work with people all over the world and I use Zoom. It works really well in terms of just auto-recording a session. It's really weird, by the way, because whenever then you go through and look for those visual ideas, it means by the time I then see the client again, I've sort of memorized that conversation so I can remember the little things they've said and stuff. It's a bit weird. Anyway, but I think this is where my gift actually lies, because it's listening. It's not drawing. It's listening. It's being able to tune into what someone's saying. Because people say things in lots of different ways. Not just by the words that come out of their mouths, but by their body language, by how they react to things, and that's why I'm fascinated by dialogue in terms of people and that interplay between people. But also, then the things that when we do talk or when I go back through a conversation, the silly ideas that your mind pops up, because your mind's sort of just making little connections all the time. And you can develop a way or a habit of seeing those more clearly. So generally, I'm always interested in humour. Right? Humour is like a signpost that points to just little bits of gold. Right? I'm interested in metaphor. You know, people use metaphors all the time. And you can really tune into, well, what does that metaphor mean? Why are they using that metaphor? Even though it's just off the cuff, they're not thinking about it, but it's just there. And then having the bravery, because drawing is about bravery. It's about starting with a blank piece of something and making a mark. Often whenever people see the things I've created, they're looking at the thing that's at the end of that process. But it doesn't start there. It starts with just committing something to a piece of paper that then starts to speak to you if you listen to it, and it'll start telling you what it needs to be. And it's a very curious thing, but it's a journey. It's not an outcome, right? But drawing and putting stuff out there is bravery. And most people will tell you, like I've had conversations just in the last 2 days, I can't draw for toffee. I've never been able to draw. I'm not a creative at all. I'm not artistic. I'm not. And there's a starting point which basically says I'm not. And I don't buy that for a minute. I really don't. Because one thing I do know is that if you do something every day, you can't help but get better at it. Okay? And I know that, yes, it's more complicated than that, and lots of things go into how people create stuff. But that I have found to be true. Okay? But the other thing that bothers me about drawing and people's mindset, because it is a mindset, is that you're denying me access to your insight. Because if you could get from listening to seeing to drawing to be able to commit something, you know, I could benefit from that, because I'm convinced that this room and the heads in this room are all different because of the experiences that each person has had. And therefore the insights that just bubble up, that seem obvious to you but aren't obvious to other people, are actually worthwhile if you could share them. And drawing is a really good way, or being able to make that visual is a very powerful way of being able to do that. Anyway, so here's some examples of some of the stuff I created. Again, one of the early ones was Audrey Waters. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Audrey's work, but like I had a 1 hour conversation with Audrey. And I remember it so well because it was one of those ones where the technology totally failed me. And I'm just like, I can have an open conversation with Audrey here, and this is all being recorded, and then I go to the recording and there's no audio. What have I done? It was only me, and I couldn't hear Audrey. You know what I mean? It was a nightmare. Anyway, but I asked Audrey right at the end, it was just like, in one line, what are you trying to say to the people that you're communicating to? And it was just flippant, but Audrey was just like, I suppose I'm just telling them to be less pigeon, And I'm just like, that's the thing, there it is, grab it while it's there. And therefore we turned it into artwork. I've done a lot of work with alt, and again, they're very membership oriented, very participatory oriented. And the artwork that I create for them often starts with who wants to be part of a session that we're going to talk about our values and what they mean to people, and we maybe do 2 or 3 calls, and we boil that down into a bunch of ideas that then turn into artwork. So it's the same process, but the people are the membership. But of course, those people can see the reflection of their conversation in the stuff that gets created. So it becomes something that people are happy to own, happy to wear, because it's theirs. I'm just a conduit. As I said, if you see my laptop, I've created so many stickers. Excuse me. But here's the example. I'm borrowing from Roy Lichtenstein here. Obviously. But again, that's an aesthetic that people recognise that you can use. But I'm also, again, somebody said this as part of my in one of the calls that I had with a client. And again, it's a silly idea, but it's an idea that then resonated with other people. And when something resonates with other people, I know it has strength, and I know it's worth developing. Or even, I grew up going to church, and I go to a community church in London, and I suppose I wrestle with it quite a bit. But having a pen in your hand and trying to just tune into what somebody's saying in that regard as well, I find is quite helpful, quite liberating. But again, just the phrase "fresh hope," and I was just like, "What? Oh, that's just like a big thing of fresh milk." You know what I mean? And just and you go off on a little journey with whatever that becomes, and soon someone's asking you, "Well, can I make a T-shirt out of that?" Because that just really means something to me. Or even just an experience. So this is the process that essentially I went through giving this public talk. You know what I mean? Because there was a point in my life where I couldn't have given a talk to 5 people. Never mind, 3,000 people that we have here. At least I'll pretend it's 3,000 people. But just the idea, this is the journey. Just somebody said it's a bit of a roller coaster ride, isn't it? And I'm like, that's exactly what it is, and I can visualize that. Why am I doing it? Oh no, because I've got something to say, and I'm not prepared. And that's the thing. It's just like no, right, okay, let's get prepared, and I'm ready. And then there's a point where you get to where you're like, actually, I'm going to enjoy this. And that nervousness turns into adrenaline, and anyway, that really helps me. But there's this constant monkey on my back that's just saying, you're not good enough. You don't have an arts degree. You didn't go to arts college. You're just a software engineer. What do you know about creativity? Anyway, I did work recently with Open University, and I got them to talk about their Open program. And they were founded in 1969, obviously, and again, just trying to put things together that will mean things to them. But again, same process, that I got them talking about what that open degree meant to them. GoGN, this is a good example of sort of visual language, because it was just so lovely working with these people, I have to say. But the travel element of what they do, they're a very spread out group of researchers, I suppose, researchers in openness, and therefore borrowing from the aesthetic of the golden age of travel, just seemed to really resonate with them. But once you've got that visual language, you can then go, all right, okay, well, what does a webinar ticket look like? Or what does an open guide look like? And the rest becomes just a lot easier, because you've already got that visual language that resonates. And recently, it's got me into sort of illustrations for sort of book covers. This is a book that's just out. It's actually free on ebook if you're interested in it. 25 years of EdTech. But again, went through the same process of working with Martin to explore different ideas, and I suppose I'm mashing up a whole bunch of things here to grab your interest and to say something about maybe the false promises of EdTech. But one of the most interesting journeys that I've been on recently is to do with activism. I have found that if you get an activist or a couple of activists in a room and start them off with a question, they talk from here, right? Because they're not in it for the money. No activist is in it for the money. And the stuff that comes out is so rich with metaphor that my job is easy, right? Here's another one. And in contrast to that, politicians, what they say is so sterile. right? They have so much bluster and so much gusto, and yet their words, they're empty. There's nothing in them, right? And so I've really enjoyed working. So there's a whole bunch of organisations lobbying the European Parliament with regards to plastic pollution, with regards to single-use plastic, and I've really enjoyed working with them. It's one of the great sadnesses that I have about Brexit, and that because I can see the standards that are being constantly raised as a result of the European Parliament, as a result of countries working together and working and trying to not let the industry dominate. And I really fear for Britain in that, in terms of their poor decision making, shall we say? Anyway, but yeah, also trying to use humour. People don't want to be shouted at when it comes to activism, but humour disarms. So just the use of the straw, or the eye on that turtle looking at you, in terms of what that's saying, and just being exposed to the fact that there's a whole industry behind the whole plastic industry, which is very linked to the petrochemical industry, obviously, that really is building plants, and plastic production is, they have no intention of pulling back or cleaning up, I have to say. Anyway, don't get me started on that. Another sort of bunch of work that I do, and hopefully this will start to get relevant in a minute, but you'd probably call it graphic recording, and that's a different sort of game, because that's live recording of a conversation, okay? And that feels a lot more like a performance to me, because suddenly you're like, oh, here's a guy who's supposed to be able to draw, and he's recording what we're saying. It better be good. At least that's the monkey on my back again. But and I'll give you an example of what I mean by graphic recording. So here's me listening to a lecture at Ada College talking about enterprise programming. And look, this is you could probably turn that into a resource in terms of how this lecturer sort of took these students through what enterprise programming actually is. But I'll show you a different conversation here. This is a dialogue. That last one is a monologue, and it has structure, and it is tidy, and it has a flow. But dialogue isn't like that. Right? Dialogue's messy. And it's often why we stay away from it or feel uncomfortable with it. And it's harder to capture. But in there is and it might not actually mean that much to you, and that's okay. But to the people that were part of that conversation, they can recognize that, recognize the elements of that. And there's little ideas hidden in there that we then turned into artwork, right? And I suppose that what I'm getting at here is back to my superpower, which is listening, right? Essentially, when I was 5, my hair fell out. Since the age of 5, I haven't had any hair at all, and that was definitely my Achilles heel. Sort of growing up, I wasn't bothered at the time, sort of growing up in middle of country, in Banbridge. It wasn't an issue at all, but obviously getting into secondary school, I had a pretty poor view of myself, and I suppose you say I was super aware of other people and of myself. I was super aware of a continual little voice that was just like, look, my boy's got no hair. But to the point where, I suppose I was always able to tell whether people were talking about me from a distance, because people aren't that subtle, I suppose, as well. Even to the point where I was in Saudi Arabia a few years ago on business, and I don't necessarily plan to return to Saudi Arabia, but I was in this mall walking along, and there were two women completely in the full burqa with just, I was just able to see their eyes, and I could still tell from just being able to see their eyes that one was saying to the other, "Look at the size of that fella," Just it really tickled me that I could tell that just from, even though there was no language between us, and I could only see, that part, but that visual alertness that was my nemesis is my superpower now. And it's taken me a long time to realize that and to get to that point. And it's still one of my demons, which is why I'm talking about it, because every time you talk about your demons, they get slightly smaller. I have realized. But I find that very encouraging that actually there's a thing that makes me different that I'm now channeling into this crazy journey of creating stuff. And that leads me on to this, because I was telling Catherine, I've gone on a new journey recently, because the Ada College, who I've sort of known, they're if you don't know the Ada College, they're the National Computing College in the UK. They started about 5 years ago. They're named after Ada Lovelace. They have the intention of having a 50-50 male-female split in terms of their students. They are trying to create a diverse group of students as well, in terms of where they take their students from. And they run sort of sixth form and apprenticeships in London. And they're just about to open a new campus in Manchester. And anyway, they got in touch with me one day. I made the mistake of telling one of their sort of deputy head that I needed a little bit more people time, because I've realized that if I'm in my shed creating stuff for people 5 days a week, I go a little bit loopy, right? And so a little bit more people time would be good for me. And next morning I got an email saying, "We're a lecturer short for this module. Would you be interested in doing it?" And do you know what? I thought, I've got nothing to lose here. I wonder what that's about. You know what I mean? Because I've never been a teacher before. I've never taught, right? And so before I could think too much about it, which is important, I said yes to something that was quite far out of my comfort zone. Which is a rule in life that I have, is that an opportunity presents itself that's out of your comfort zone. You take it and you worry about how to get there later, right? I know that Catherine was agreeing with me whenever we were talking about this at lunchtime. But I started to think, well, could I use my visual thinkery methods with these students? In fact, I knew nothing about these students. Anyway, I found out that they were they're sort of second year apprentices. Turned out that my wife laughs. My wife's a primary school teacher, and I described here that these are sort of 20 plus in age. I've got about 10 students in a class. She's like, "That's not teaching. It's not teaching unless you've got 30 people and at least half of them don't want to be there." Anyway, I had 10 people who did want to be there, but the trouble is that the module I had was software quality assurance. Oh my goodness! Like that is that's the worst thing I could. I just didn't think about it at the time, but I suddenly thought, hold on a minute, I haven't done quality assurance since university, and I wasn't even paying attention then. So. And then I thought, well, actually, hold on a minute. The companies I've started and that I've been involved in have all had a degree of quality assurance. So I've got some stories up my sleeve here, and actually, they already knew. In fact, they know more than I do. And whenever the materials were already presented, and so they're like, "Here's the materials." The materials were like 20 years old, and I'm like, things have changed in the world of software in the last 20 years. Anyway, this was sort of setting up sort of a perfect scenario, because I realized that my challenge was, how can I put together the knowledge that's already there, right? And how can I use a visual approach to do that? I actually even started off with creating a visual map of the students that I had. A great little trick I learned from a person who used to work for Mozilla is get people to introduce themselves. Who are you? Where are you from? and say the line, if you really knew me, you would know that, ... And we sort of went around. I sort of started out. I said, well, actually, I used to live in Tanzania, and so I've got a little bit of street Swahili that I can get out and tell you the odd Swahili proverb if you're interested. And then you sort of go around. But I'm drawing out the not drawing little sort of visual impressions of people, because people get a bit touchy if you draw a moustache and the moustache isn't there. But just drawing out the sort of here's where people are sitting, here's their name, and then here's the thing they say about themselves. And obviously people like talking about themselves, but you've already made a connection between a person, where they work, and the thing that makes them them, right? So I could I'm rubbish with names, but I could remember all of them because we went through that little process. Anyway, so even from that little visual approach where I had a little map of who they were and what made them, a little individual characteristic. But also the fact that we realized that, here's us talking about bug trackers. And I would sort of start off with, and in fact, I'm using one of these, totally lo-fi. This is my best piece of kit. Although terrible if you want to take it through airport security, because it immediately is like, what's this? You know what I mean? It just looks, it's heavy. You know what I mean? It's got a camera attached to it. What are you gonna? And I'm like, it's a docking camera. Anyway, but seriously, it is my best piece of kit because you can plug it into a big screen like this, and you can play the magic game, right? You can say, so here, what do we know about bug trackers? And somebody will say something, and their words will just appear on the big screen, right? And I'm sure some of you are already doing this in your teaching. I'm sure you are. Anyway, but of course, this looks maybe like a bit of a mind map. It looks like maybe a bad mind map, but it's not a mind map because it's collaborative. So there's more than one mind, right? And it's an explorative landscape, I would say, of knowledge that they already have. But not only that, is that because this is happening peer-to-peer, they're hearing their own words getting recognized, and they're learning from each other. And I was blown away by that, because as in they'll take more from each other than they will from me, right? But they're also realizing that actually bug trackers in Google are different than bug trackers in Deloitte, are different in, and they're actually realizing, we're giving this knowledge that I already have a name, and actually putting it together and organizing it and joining it together, which is what this process is about. So, and I found that I can sit on top of that. I can gather up all their knowledge and then spot where some of the gaps are, and start to fill in some of those gaps. And that I don't need to feel daunted to the fact that they know more than me and that their knowledge is more current than mine, because they're working for these companies. But I found that really empowered them and their voices, and that they started to then experiment with the things that came out of their mouths. Let's see. Here's another one. I've now done 3 different modules, and the last one was to do with data visualization. And the assessment was, how do you create to create a poster using whatever data they had, data set that they had found and they'd brought to life. And of course, suddenly we're into storytelling, and I'm like, right, what do you know about storytelling? And this is all them, but we're getting into, well, a good story has a hook. Oh right, how's it? Oh right, brilliant. And talked about what a story arc is. Somebody brought that up, and again, the knowledge was there. The knowledge was already there. It was just in bits and pieces, and it was just about sort of putting it together and recognizing it. Or, look, half the battle is creating a safe space for this to happen, right? Where people actually can be open about getting something wrong and whatever else. But that's my main point here, because if you allow me to step into a bit of, bit of Paulo Freire. Again, my wife did one of these sort of PGCE on the hoof experiences where, from day one you're in the classroom, and anyway, I was just peering over her shoulder whenever she was doing the university parts, and she was like, "Oh, Paulo Freire, you'd really like Paulo Freire, Brian." And sure enough, I found myself really connecting, and obviously Catherine then put me onto a book, We Make This Road by Walking, which is a fantastic, absolutely fantastic book, which again I really enjoyed. But it asked these questions of sort of who defines knowledge and who gives it a value. And again, back to what I said right at the start of sharing or having a shared Irish history. I did some work for Dublin City University recently, and the guy I was working with, a guy called Eamon Costello, we were comparing notes on our school history, our school Irish history. And he was saying, "Oh, for goodness sake, by the time you got to sort of third year at school, Irish history's so bleak that we were all just done with it, And I was like, I didn't get that version of Irish history. I got the British version of Irish history, and as you know, the British always win, for starters. But I remember us doing there's this little slot of us doing the how Ireland became separated, essentially. It was like in third year, maybe just one semester, and suddenly history was, hold on a minute, this is relevant to me. And we're talking about the IRA and the IRB, and I was like, "Oh, is that the B team? Is that? Well, how did that?" We just didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about where this came from, and seriously, we didn't even touch on the potato famine. And how can that be? How can it be that so much is missing, from that narrow British education, and yet the fact that I'm an Irishman, you know what I mean? How can it be? So who defines knowledge is a question we must ask, and we must ask it in technology too. Who defines what is valuable to spend time on and what is not valuable? But also this idea of, again, has been thought a lot before I ever came to it, but teachers and students need to see themselves simultaneously as both teachers and students. I can't tell you how much I learned from those apprentices. And it was a pleasure, and it wasn't a problem. I'd also got nothing to lose, I know, but I got to sit alongside them, and we got to explore together. And that was fantastic, and recognise the knowledge that they brought into the room. And I would suggest that get any crowd of people in a room, and they already bring a whole ton of knowledge into the room. So monologue starts to be a curious thing to do, even though I'm monologuing at you right now. And in that last vein, Freire also said that monologue oppresses, but dialogue liberates. And I believe this to be true. So, have I really taken that amount of time? That is outrageous. Have you got 5 more minutes? Have we got 5? That's all 5 more. Right, okay. 5 more minutes. Because I thought what we could do is actually, let's see. Where are we now? I thought what I'd do, creating a landscape like that, and having so much knowledge in the room, you get a lot of hocus pocus when it comes to people talking about technology that's coming, and things that we should be thinking and worried about. But I wondered if I posed the question to this audience, to you, whether I could add some words to this graphic. Well, what do you consider should be on our evolving learning landscape? What things can I write on here? Who can give me one? Starter for 10. Well, people. Who else? Global. Sorry? Global. Mm.
Just looking at that and thinking, what's coming over the hill?
Yeah. Yeah. Community. Conversations.
Can we have a volcano in the far distance?
Yep.
Fake news coming out. Profit.
Is that P-H-E-T or
P-R-O-F-I-T.
We could have both. Love. Reflection. Operations.
Sorry?
Opportunities.
Opportunities. Connections.
Risk taking.
Risk taking. Epics. Ethics. Not sure how to draw ethics, so I'm just going to write it down. That's okay.
Continuity and change.
Continuity and change. Let's see.
Can I compliment the volcano with a big glacier coming in from the left of government regulations?
Look, there's a glacier right there.
My tower was. There's certain lube about you. No, miserable.
Motivation.
Mm. Hope.
Oh, I must find another miserable one.
You're not allowed. You're not allowed.
And
You're both.
risk-taking, trust. With the risk-taking, trust each other.
Yeah.
Right, so, the hang glider of empowerment now.
Hang glider of empowerment. So as I was saying, there's a few loud voices in the room. You know. I'm going to write empowerment though.
I'll probably post it. Yeah.
We could turn the word into a
That's nice.
hang glider.
Peaks and troughs.
Peaks.
Just put in a roller coaster.
Surveillance capitalism.
Yeah. Oh no, how do you spell surveillance? Surveillance.
Big brother.
Yeah, that's much better, like. What about climate? That's got to be on everybody's agenda.
Can we have a big bog at the bottom of data?
Sinkhole.
Right, I'm gonna stop it there. obviously you get a different bunch of people, you're going to have a different contribution or a different product there. But it's just the idea that, most of those things I've drawn before at some point, but they're not very hard to draw. But somehow, if I had have tried to have told you, well, here's what I think you should be thinking about, it wouldn't mean half of what you've just put up there together. And there's something about collaborating with our knowledge that I think we all need to remember. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Let me just skip back to this last slide and just remind you that you must notice things and wonder and hopefully create. Okay, thank you.
What do you say after that? Is there anybody that would like to make a comment or observation or ask Bryan anything at this stage? I know we're kind of time poor, but I don't think I could possibly go without giving somebody an opportunity. John.
Is visual communication that you've kind of shown us today a literacy we should be teaching?
Bryan, can you repeat the question for any live stream?
Yes, I can. So the question was, is visual literacy something we should be teaching? I think it has been taught in the past, hasn't it? In terms of, and I think we're going backwards in terms of how we treat visual literacy in terms of the presence of art in our schools. I can't. I have 3 kids. I'm always sort of saying to them, look, drawing, the ability to draw, to be able to communicate visually, that goes with anything. It doesn't matter whether you're a botanist or even a street sweeper, you know what I mean, and be able to do a bit of graffiti on the side, you know what I mean. I think that could work. But I think it goes with anything, being able to communicate an idea visually. So why shouldn't it? But I think it becomes tricky whenever, certainly in the UK, whenever it's all about what you can measure. And that's the road to ruin as far as I'm concerned, I think. So I would say yes. So I think we should if we can, but it has been before, and we're squeezing it out, I think.
Another question. Just my first job was software tester, and I'm surprised you left out regression testing in your diagram.
Well, we did get to regression testing. I'll have you know. Yeah. But thanks for that build there. Heckling, eh? Goodness me.
But I do think it shows exactly what Bryan said on the last slide, which is if that came from a group of people talking on what they knew, then that obviously was something they didn't know, John, and that you had to deal with subsequently. In the same way the slide that we produced there had a range of different things, but anybody else coming in could put up a totally different slide. And surely that's the wealth and the beauty of the individual and individual ideas coming together. And I have to say, I've just enjoyed the whole thing. It's made me think about various things. I've written stuff down I want to follow up on. And I think it would just, I'd like to see us all give another big round of applause to Bryan.